If there's one text that helps to break the metaphysical bottleneck present in Western philosophy at the turn of the 20th century, it's an introduction to metaphysics by Henri Bergson. At the start of the 20th century, Western metaphysics was stuck between two dominant but limited schools of thinking, the analytic tradition and the continental tradition, i.e. the empiricists and the idealists. Bergson argues in this seminal paper that both fail to capture absolute truth or absolute knowledge of nature because they rely on what he calls derivative knowledge, concepts that we pull out of experience rather than the experience itself. Our limited measurements are conceptualizations of our experience. Bergson argues that when we prioritize these concepts, we lose the indivisible lived duration, in touch with that which precedes our derivative knowledge, our differentiations that existed before we started labeling them. I articulate in a paper I wrote for Jake Sherman's class, Religious Metaphysics After Modernity, that Bergson is touching on what I call the mereological necessity. And this is a logical trap that I find in a lot of Western metaphysics, that metaphysics often devolves into a mereological project, a project of attempting to argue wholes and parts, or a coherent logic of wholes and parts. I feel that Bergson, as well as William James in the decades before, articulated the great divide in Western metaphysics as a mereological tension, where the empiricists look to explain wholes by virtue of their parts, and idealists look to explain parts by virtue of the whole. Bergson suggests that our views on time, space, and physics are misguided in a very similar way, in that they tend to devolve into a project of mereology that loses touch with the ontological foundation, the duration, and the intuition that preceded it. Right? One of the more useful metaphors that Bergson uses in this paper is a mathematical metaphor, where he uses the symbols or the metaphor of derivative versus integral knowledge. Anybody that's ever taken pre-calculus or calculus in high school, or have taken any classes in undergrad or graduate, you know that derivative is an instantaneous rate of change. It's an individual measurement along the path of, let's say, a moving particle or a projectile, where it is at one particular point, its velocity, its momentum, its position. The integral is the sum total of the derivatives that form a curve or an arc of that projectile or of that particle. Bergson uses this and says that our derivative knowledge, our differentiations, are insufficient to fully represent the integral or the curve that they are a part of, that they are measured out of it, but by themselves cannot capture or contain the truth or the fullness of the integral knowledge, or of the integral, the curve that they are a part of. Right? This is a great metaphor for mathematical-minded people that are not necessarily trained in philosophy, and I feel like it's really fruitful and useful. The second fruitful analogy that he uses is what he calls the cinematographic view. Cinema being that of moving pictures, right? This was a new technology at the beginning of the 20th century, and I'm sure that Bergson was excited to incorporate it into his philosophical stance. Bergson argues that the frame rate, or the discretization, the taking snapshots or measurements of reality, is insufficient to properly represent the continuous state of becoming, that which is continuously coming into being. He says that any form of measurement of time, for example, in this stance, is insufficient to properly capture all of the infinite potential that rests between each frame. The smaller that you get, the more that you try to discretize it, there will always be something that is not captured by it, right? Reality is smooth all the way down, according to Bergson. I think that this is a very useful metaphor because it uses technological metaphor and analogy that we use every day. I think everybody watches videos. YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram are the most popular platforms on earth. And we all, in Western society, watch movies and TV shows regularly, probably more than we should. We should be reading Bergson more, right? Why Bergson matters today, I think his work offers a way to navigate the current tensions in physics, for sure, in general relativity, quantum theory, but also in the philosophies of mind and the philosophies of consciousness. I think that there's a direct applied virtue that's present in an introduction to metaphysics. I think that the current state of the biosphere and the current global crisis can be tied to the development of science, or at least the trajectory that it's followed for the last 200 years, its marriage with technology. And I think that there's a tendency to reify the instrumental successes of science as being fundamental to reality. And Bergson's work cautions us against this exact idea and forces us to think beyond any form of differentiated, any systematic type of knowledge, recognizing its virtue And that's one of the things that I love about this body of work, is that Bergson is a mathematician. He's a physicist, or a mathematical physicist. And he understands the instrumental value of science and mathematics, but he recognizes its limitation in that it is incapable of doing metaphysics or doing ontology. And we have to get into the intuitive, lived duration, the experience which precedes all forms of differentiation or derivative knowledge. So I've written 5 out of the 8 papers that I've written so far in PCC have used this paper. I'm probably going to use it for the rest of my career and the rest of my life. I'll revisit it all the time when I just want to get some inspiration. Those of you that have had similar experiences with this body of work or with Bergson's work that's similar to this would love to speak about it. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you guys very much.